and more about how they develop their economies in this increasingly desertic environment and the impact they might have had on the environment. The environment. There are with desertification associated with the Bronze Age pastoralists. And actually, we found the exact opposite. We found the succulents were prominent in the in the lower part of the section where you had wetter environments. And in the upper part of the section, there was a massive increase in moist grasses and shrubs. And this is the time period, as you can see, of our site associated with this very dry episode. So the phytolith record shows that the succulents dominate the saline marshes, predating and contemporary with the site occupation of these early pastoralists, and more lush vegetation comes in shortly after the occupation of the site, and with alluvial deposits, more trees, shrubs, more grasses, sedges, abundant stipid grasses. But the paleoclimatic data suggests that there's climatic deterioration. So what's going on here? We suggest that possible reason for this is the changes in vegetation at our site and in the valley was actually due to the pastoralist economies. They did increase soil erosion from the hill slopes, but this soil washed down into these valleys that had very saline soils that were only friendly to succulents and plants that were not good for pastoral herds. They made the valleys more fertile. And then plus the introduction of the steppe grasses from northern central Mongolia, which were coming in with the dung from the animals, created a microenvironment that was much better for pastoralism when they entered this region. And you can look at it from a niche construction point of view, where the pastoralists were creating their own environment. They turned it from a desert environment to a desert steppe, where they could operate their economy more effectively. So therefore improving on the environment. And that's the summary. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arlene. Okay, now the question is whether we're going to the Atacama Desert or to the Negev.
We still not here. I think the Negev is the next point.
Our next presenter is Yoav Avni, the Geological Survey of Israel, working for many, many years in the Negev. And his presentation will be Geodiversity as Key for Human Survival in the Harshest Desert on Earth. Yoav.
Okay, sorry everybody. I will talk shortly about the ability of the arid and the hyper-arid environment to support desert societies over the ages. I will talk mainly about the geology and less about desert societies, but everything that I will say, and this is of course the short presentation, the extended one is already in the site, in the website of the conference. So everybody is invited to go in and to see the big story. The short story, only to say, is coming from the region between Sahayan and Arabian deserts that are supposed to be the most arid and hostile environments in the means of desert environments that receive very minor precipitation, less even till 5 millimeters per year, almost equal to the Atacama deserts that is supposed to be the driest one. Even here, when we try to make this climate gradient between the areas that received about 100 millimeters, and this is this part of this picture coming from the Negev highlands, into this part that was taken in Jordan, southern Jordan, we are dropping the precipitation level from 100 to 20, and still, as you can see in this tent, people are living in these zones. Today, the Bedouins, and in the past, the rich archaeological background is giving us notes about presence of people here during the last 1.5 million years, just after coming out of Africa. Now, the question is, what is the ability of these people to survive in these hostile environments? Coming to more and more hostile as much as you go into the core of the Sahayan and Arabian desert. And the reason the ability is based on a very good transportation or transforming the very rare events of rainstorms into reservoirs of water kept above and especially below the surface. And these reservoirs, even though they are very limited and scarce, and they appear in very limited places, still they provide the needs of people for over the ages. This is two examples of that. The upper part is coming from a reconstruction of the last ice age of this region of the Sahayan. We are talking about extended or increasing the amount of precipitation still in desert environment, but improvements during glacial times. And the interglacial times, as you can see in the bottom, they are a bit still with vegetation. A lot of soil erosion is occurring because the high intensity rain that is sometimes appearing in these regions. And all these, of course, are promoting the existence of special places like springs, and we can note them from the background by travertines. The meaning is springs that exist in this region. The bottom one here is taken in Jordan Valley, and this is Palo Lakes and wetlands that exist here during the last 2 million years. And it's waiting to people to use them. This is a sketch pointing out about 90 places in the deep desert. This is the hyper-arid and the arid zone. About 90 places in this region of Sinai Peninsula in the southern Negev that have permanent water resources. And the circles are giving the note of 25 kilometers of radius from each peninsula and the water supply in the desert till the next one. And as you can see, they cover most of the region that is expected to be hyper-arid, receiving less than 25 millimeters per year. Now, all these pictures were taken in this zone, and that one in the bottom is the most important one. And this is the ability to get water even in the dry summer. The water is kept below the surface in a depth of 20 centimeters or less even, by people that know where are these hidden spots. And we have the ability today to trace these places, not by sophisticated means, but by the ability of this person living in this zone in southern Jordan, in the place where he knows the water are existing in the hyper-arid zone of the Arava Valley. Now, this is part of the supply of food in these remote areas of very harsh environments. Still, trees that are flourishing during the summertime. This is the gazelle that is the key species of of course, for hunting, and other creatures like that one that are specialists for tracing them. And of course, this is part of the food supply, even limited, but still exists in the arid zone. Now, during the ages, and this I'm coming to the end, people were utilizing these deserts for transportation. Later on, they developed the cisterns that increased dramatically the ability to use water in the deserts. And the outcome of that, after domestication of the donkeys first and then the camels, is the caravan roads that cross the desert all over the region. And in the later phase, people were even investing in agricultural enterprises in the desert. This is the normal view of the Negev highlands, 100-millimeter zone, but this is the hyper-arid zone of southern Sinai, receiving only 25 millimeters per year, but still there is irrigated plots that are sustained for the whole year round, and people are using them, of course, as part of the basic needs. We are talking anyhow in small groups of people, not of course huge societies, but for these small societies, this area was inhabited for the last 1.5 million years. And of course, everything, and the notes, as you can see in the conclusions, is based on a very good knowledge of the geodiversity and the local hydrology of desert environments. And we have, according to the archaeological findings and surveys, we have the ability to know today that these people have the ability to survive because they have the ability to understand what is the basic rules of the geodiversity, where to find the water, and what is the hydrology that is subsiding them in this harsh environment. So to sum up, the environment is not the problem. So desert societies could survive in low numbers in these areas all over the ages as them in this, giving us the notes for that. Thank you very much. The environment is not the problem. So desert societies could survive in low numbers in these areas all over the ages as them in this, giving us the notes for that. Thank you very much. The environment is not the problem. So desert societies could survive in low numbers in these areas all over the ages as them in this, giving us the notes for that. Thank you very much. The environment is not the problem. So desert societies could survive in low numbers in these areas all over the ages.
Okay, we had the close remarks coming back repeatedly. Before going on to the next presentation, I would just want to remind the audience, because I guess most of you didn't hear the opening remarks of Yoav, that the structure of this workshop is very short presentations, which are based on the extended summaries or presentation which were loaded to Yoav. That the structure of this workshop, making it presentations which are based on the extended respondent summaries presentation. The stage will be open for questions. You can put your questions.
Does it please unmute your
summaries presentation. The stage will be open for questions. You can put your
does it please unmute your sorry, we're asking everyone to close the application and stay only in the Zoom, otherwise there is an echo. So everyone that's joined us, everyone please close the application and stay only in the Zoom. Okay, now it's better.
Okay, hope it.
Colombo is with us.
Okay, so now we can go from the Negev back to the Atacama Desert and to the presentation of Calogero Santoro, who's been working for many, many years in the Atacama, doing archaeological research, I think for the last 30 or 40 years, probably the experts for the desert societies in the Atacama deserts. So if you can upload the presentation.
I will show my screen now. Give me 1 second. You need to, the amphitryon need to allow me to share my screen. Otherwise, I cannot do that. Who is managing the commands?
Now you have to share the screen to give Kalogero the opportunity to upload.
I check if I can do it, and otherwise I'll share my screen because I have the presentation. Just a minute. Where is Kalogero?
I'm here.
Yeah, in Atacama. Just a minute. Okay. No, I have no
Yeah, too old for
to allow them. So I'll share my screen, okay? And Kalogero, you tell me when to.
I'm ready. So you are going to share my presentation?
Okay, this is the one. Okay, this is the presentation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I have 10 minutes. I will try to be, well, you know the title. Let's go to the next presentation just to show you the map, the global map, to point the Atacama Desert on the left side of the map. Next. And next one. And most of the history that we have, the human history, is after the last glacial maximum, because there is no good, or actually there is no evidence of people living or getting into the Americas before 17,000 years ago into South America. Maybe in North America it could be a little bit different, but in South America the best evidence is about 15 to 17,000 years ago, meaning after the last glacial maximum. And so this is the study area is the Atacama Desert from southern Peru to northern Chile, and the study area is on the right side. This is an inland basin with several canyons or ravines that get into this inland basin. Most of them today are dry. Next one. And this is the study area is Pampa Delta Marugal, where we have these quebradas getting into this basin, which is about 200 kilometers in length and about 100 kilometers in width. And so most of the activities are located at the mouth of these quebradas, or we have the proximal section of the alluvial fan. And the other area is the distal section of the alluvial fan, going closer to the coast. From the upper part of the quebradas here, we're about 80 kilometers from the coast. From here, we're about 60 kilometers from the coast. From here to the Andes, we're about 80 kilometers. And so that's just to make you to get you an impression of the landscape. Next, and this is how abrupt is this landscape. The previous one, but just you see that is 0 meter above sea level. This is about 6,000 meters above sea level. So it's a very steep terrain, and the study area is around this, within this intermediate zone, which is between the coastal cordillera and the Pacific coast and the high Andes. And today, this is the driest place on Earth, one of the driest places on Earth. There is no rain and no surface runoff. Next one. So about after the last glacial maximum, there was a major wet phase that reactivated the whole hydrological system and provoked a completely different landscape by the end of the Pleistocene, early in the Holocene. So, and created the first condition for human people getting into South America, and particularly within the Atacama Desert. And so the other part of the left section shows the dry season, or the dry phase during the most of the Holocene, and wet and dry phases after 10,000, about 10,000, since about 10,000 years ago. Next one.
I can.
Next one.
There's no way. Oh, sorry.
So, so these are the major point here is that we have water over the surface, water table getting closer to the surface. We have increased surface runoff, megafauna, modern fauna, and human society is still a question mark before 13,000 years ago. Next one. So today, when there is a little rain in the highlands, we got this kind of environment, but that will be it. Next one. So by the end of the next one, let's move okay. So by the end of the Pleistocene, the paleoecological interpretation are thinking that probably the environment in this intermediate landscape was zone was about like something like this, with this kind of trees that like Escalonia and bush vegetation, an animal like guanaco, the one that is on the left side. Next one. And we have evidence of this megatherium. Next one. This Epidion, this American horse. But no, today we haven't found any evidence of people getting in contact or managing or hunting or scavenging these animals. So they are on the ground, but around surrounded by archaeological site, but no evidence of actual interaction with this megafauna. Next one. So this is the upper part where some of the sites are located, and the lower part on the lower part where most of the archaeological sites are located. We have hundreds of hectares of human activities exposed by the wind, so that we have a process of deflation. So we have several hundred of square meters of sites of activities that occur about between 13,000 to 19,000 year before present. And the nice thing here is that after that, there have been no human activity in this area. It became dry, and that was end of the story for this particular section of the landscape. Next one. We have to go fast because just this is one of the sites in the upper part of the alluvial fan, Quebrada Manido 12. The next one. And these are the very good preservation of the material, shells from the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and wood, bones, and even twisted animal fiber. You know, these have been dated about 12,000 years ago. Next one. The typical projectile point. Next one. And so this is the landscape today. So this is one of the alluvial fan. Plenty of human activities, late Pleistocene human activities. When we just started to work here, we couldn't believe that we will be able to find something in this landscape. Next one. It's full of this kind of material. Next one. And so one of this is QM12, but this is another very good site because it is around a paleo wetland. Next one. And these are the taxa that have been found in this wetland. The one that are marked with red dots are the ones that haven't any connection with archaeological remains. The other one they were hunted and eaten and processed by humans. Next one. And we have a large number of animals, including birds, rodents, and the taxa that are located there, named there, and camelids too. Next one. And so what we found is this is the typical profile with the sandy soil on top of the surface, and the remains of this fauna are located on top of that, are exposed on top of that. And this part of this profile is related with the earliest rainfall phase, which occurred between 17,000 to about 14,000 years ago, with no human evidence of activities. Next one. A summary of all the sites that have been identified with some of the main important artifacts. Some of them are very agnostic for the late Pleistocene epoch. Next one. And another important thing here is that people not only knew very well the actual landscape of resources of the Atacama Desert, but also they managed to move to the highland and get this very good material from the highlands on the right, and also shells that they used to produce some jewelry or some adornment, because this kind of shell you cannot eat from them, you cannot get food from them. And beside the next one, but also they managed to get also this material from the coast, all these hammer stones from the coast and the shells. Next one. And this piece of wood that is a Ceiba SP, and this is a big tree and need at least 3,000 millimeters of water. And so it was brought to the Atacama Desert, which means to move down the line at least between 70 to 80 kilometers. So the network of these people were very interesting. They were larger than the people that were living in the area in later prehistoric phases. Next one. The next one, I think, yeah. And this is just a summary. Let's go to the next one. And just to show you once again the site on the middle of the Atacama Desert, the coastal the coast to the west, and the highland and the tropical forest today. So it was a huge area of interaction that were managed by these people who also have different camps. We still don't know if they were having residential camp versus another multifunctional camps. This is something that we are still discussing about. Next one. And so, but all this paradisiac life collapsed about 9,000 years ago, and the landscape have remained like this since then. So what happened? What happened then?
We have another 2 minutes because we need to leave time for the discussion.
Okay. Next one. Let's move quickly because next one. So people move to can I see the previous one? Well, people moved to the highlands and to the coast. And then about 2,500 years ago, they went back to the quebradas, to this basin, but as farmers. There was another wet phase in the highlands, but the only way to recolonize the desert was as farmers. There was no enough resources for hunter-gatherers to live there. So they introduced, next one. They introduced all the product that we eat today in our, like these ones, were introduced about 2,000 to 3,000 years ago by these people. Next one. And they manage the water amazingly well, They introduced also this tree, that this is the algarrobo tree, which is a symbolic tree from northern Chile. Next one. Next one. Just to show you this is the landscape and the site around this. Next one. Next one. The sites. These are sort of Neolithic sites. Next one. The structure, a strong structure, very simple, large one, but simple. Next one. There is no huge investment in domestic or foreign area. Another village. Next one. All of them in a very dry landscape today. Next one. Just an example of the buildings. Another village. Next one. Detail of this complex compound in the middle of the desert. Next one. Detail of this architecture, stone and clay. Next one. Just more detail. Next one. The irrigation system. Next one. They brought water for several kilometers to, and these are just one of the areas that were irrigated. 400 hectares have been calculated. Next one. The product, algarrobo, corn, cotton, etc. Next one. The stone tools to work with the farming. Next one. Another area with the jewelry or the adornment, shark teeth and a malachite. Next one. Once again, the economic activities, but always linked with some ideological or ceremonial activities. Next one.
We have to finish in.
Yeah. Okay, we can finish here. So this is a good example of how people manage, the landscape. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 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 See, the last 1,000 years, this area get empty again. And this is the last period, the 19th and 20th century. People went back again, but at a completely artificial way. Water had to be drilled from the ground or brought by the railroad. And so it's a completely different system. Very very stressful system for the environment. And I think we are just this is the last one. Yeah. So the contrast between the past and the present. Good, yeah, and thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. And the last presentation takes us back to the Negev through Uzi Avner, who's been working in the southern Negev in the Arava for the last, I think, almost 50 years now. And he's going to speak about resilience of ancient desert societies, a view from the southern Negev.
The share screen doesn't work. Gidon, do you hear me?
I can hear you, but I don't have any.
I have to get permission from you to make
Noah has to do co-host. Give Uzi co-host so that then he has access to share screen.
I can't do it because Uzi entered not as a lecturer. So the only option is, Uzi, is if you send me your presentation and I can share it, or otherwise there's no, because you entered not as a lecturer.
Okay. So do you give me the permission?
No, I can't because you entered to the session not as a lecturer. So I have no option
Can we
to
do it without the presentation?
if you can.
Maybe you can is your talk with the
What happens now? No, no permission.
No, there's no option to if you're not a lecturer and you entered to this session not as a lecturer. Just as
send the presentation to you.
yeah, but it will take time. So maybe we can
Maybe we
move
go to
on.
the next presentation, and meanwhile he sends it to you.
So Uzi, if you can send me your presentation by email, I can share it with other people.
Okay, if you like, I can say some words without the presentation.
I suggest that you just summarize your presentation, and then we can go on to the discussion.
Okay. As you know, the Negev is either arid or hyper-arid, depends on the geographical zone. I'm speaking mainly on Uvda Valley, which is in the southern Negev, in which the precipitation, annual average precipitation, is only about 20 millimeters, but the annual potential evaporation is almost 200 times higher, which means very negative water balance. Perennial water sources are very limited and very small and very rare. Vegetation is restricted to the wadi bed. General carrying capacity of the area is very low, but there is some room for surprises. First of all, previous studies showed that the Negev was a terrible place to live. I prepared all kinds of quotes from other researchers who worked in the Negev and also in Sinai.
Sorry, Uzi, you can share now your screen if you want.
Let's see. Okay, we have it. Okay, this is a short version, a synopsis of my presentation. So here you see the Negev map with a water balance between precipitation and evaporation. You see this is the Negev highlands, 25 times higher evaporation than precipitation. In the Negev highlands, almost in the southern Negev, almost 200 times. This is Uvda Valley, which I'm speaking on. And here you can see some quotations from friends of ours, their view on the Negev, which is quite miserable. Very much not recommended to live there at all. Even look at Ben Rothenberg, no man's land. People were turned any intruder into a virtual prisoner, and so forth. Moti Hyman, the Negev desert people were hungry on the verge of death. And this is the Negev highlands, which is comparatively moderate desert. If you sum up the surveys of the Negev highlands, here there is an old sum of 9 maps, which is 900 square kilometers. You see that in the early periods, there was almost nothing. The sites are usually small and very low numbers. Then we have gaps. No middle bronze 1, no middle bronze 3, or the second millennium BC is missing, and so forth. However, as I said, there is some room for surprises. This is a picture of Uvda Valley from west to east before construction of the airbase. Very typical picture of a desert with no trees, no animals, no people, nothing. But the picture is quite misleading. If you look at the far from being finished survey of the valley, you see the picture here. Here in this area, which is surveyed meticulously, we have a very dense spread of sites. Here, much less, because this area was not surveyed totally, and other areas were not surveyed at all. But altogether, in an area of today 60 square kilometers, we have 756 sites, 1920 elements, and all what you see here, these are habitation sites and the utilitarian sites. These are CAD sites. Here on the map, the red ones are the CAD sites, the black ones are the utilitarian sites. And this density of sites is actually illegal. Today, no planning committee would allow such a high density of settlement in the Negev, in the desert. Anyway, we have in Uvda 4 habitation sites that looks like this, a beehive pattern with no open spaces, finds included hundreds of arrowheads and also many animal bones, only wild animals, no domestication. Also, wild plants remains, but no domestication of plants. However, an accident happened in this site. The excavators sent 35 samples of organic materials, many charcoals, for carbon-14 dating, and they got a whole sequence of over 4,000 years. This is against our notion that desert sites are ephemeral, seasonal, passing phenomenon, and so forth. It doesn't mean that people lived here every night or every day, not maybe even every year, but in a large settlemental scale or historical scale, this has to teach us something. Similar picture we have from other sites, but with much less budget and less numbers of C14 dates, but we do have 4,000 years of settlement in specific sites. Here is one site, Site 9 in Uvda Valley, excavated by Ruth Amiran and others, including me. And what you see here is 2 layers, actually, of the 4th and 3rd millennia BC. From the below this, we have other layers that we know only in small probes of the 5th and 6th millennia BC, beginning in 5900 something BC. But what is interesting here, that we have a row of 5 square rooms. 5 square rooms is one of the indications for permanent settlement, including the finds and other criteria that say that this is a permanent settlement. It means that people could pass the summer here, which is not that easy. What did they do there? Farming in a large scale. We have adze for tilling the ground. We have hundreds of sickle blades. We have hundreds of grinding stones, very nice silo, one of the nicest ever excavated in Israel. And also this one out of 2 plow tips made of hard limestone, dated about 4000 BC. So they also had a plow, means that also had, used animals for labor. We have also botanical remains. Olive, 2 types of domesticated wheat, 4 types of domesticated barley, and others. We have 32 threshing floors. This is only one. The numbers indicate the stages in the development of the threshing floor. I will not describe them now, but this one, the circular one, which was used with the threshing sledge, was made in the 4th millennium BC, together with this, which is flint workshop. What for? For sledge blades of 2 types. Here you see an example of a sledge from Cyprus, and this is more or less what the ancient people in Uvda Valley had. Here you see one directional longitudinal one direction striation, which is typical for sledge blades on one of the blades from the site. And here you see an illustration from Northern Sinai of the use of improvised sledge, an open barrel with holes. So this is how the ancients threshed their yield, but the Bedouins did it only by trampling. They did not have a sledge. They did not know a word for the sledge even when I interviewed them. And this was true also to the ancient agriculture of Egypt. Until the Roman periods, who brought the tribulum to Egypt, the Egyptians, with all their technological advance, did not have the threshing sledge, but the desert people had it already in the 4th millennium BC. Here you see a map of the main concentration of the threshing floors, 29 out of 32, and each square is 1 kilometer. This is the largest concentration of threshing floors we know to date in the Near East, and also the only one dated to this older periods, actually Chalcolithic and early Bronze, and also later uses. After a flood, you can see nice pictures, including this one, which is a wild cereal, at least 11 species. But in the same way, you can imagine domesticated wheat and barley growing there very successfully. I did not have the time to show you the local conditions that allowed it, but you can believe. One element is important. Look at these lines, and also this one. These are the remains of a long series of long limans, which is flooding basins that the ancients did. You can believe me, with no bulldozer, only by hand. The total length of the embankments, if we restore them, is at least 75 kilometers altogether. It means not a family work here and there, but a community work. So the farmers were organized in a community. We have also other indications for it. Here
Is
in
it 2 minutes time to finish?
We're close to the end. Here you can see the cultivated strip, also here, and also some in the wadis, and continuation of Nahal Hayun, 10 kilometers to the north, was also terraced like this by limans. Altogether, 1,200 hectares of cultivated field in one unit that allowed the organization of farming community. What is interesting, that even the Bedouins had a very successful agriculture there in Uvda Valley until the mid-20th century. Here you see one storage with a plow, sickles, and other things. I will make it shorter. And also 1 out of 4 clusters of Bedouin silos. Each one, as I said, was fit for 3 tons of grains. So they could store a lot of grains for lean years. In one of the silos that we excavated, we even found sorghum, which is a summer crop. Quite surprising for this environment. And what happened next? You know, the old picture of collapse in the Near East in the late 3rd millennium BC. But the desert people actually passed this crisis better than others. Sites of the early Bronze 2 and 3 continued into the early Bronze 4. New sites was established in the Negev Highlands and in Uvda Valley in the early Bronze 4. And if we return once to this, you see now the gap of the 2nd millennium BC, missing like no remains at all. However, look at this. This is the histogram of C14 dates of copper production sites in the southern Araba. You see a whole sequence from the Chalcolithic, maybe even late Neolithic, to the Mamluk period. And what is interesting is the second millennium. Look at this, Middle Bronze, Late Bronze, Early Bronze 1. The whole second millennium is there. People lived there and they even had industry of copper. So there is no reason, in my opinion, to see the desert like empty in these periods, but quite active. It is something like our lack of ability to see them, but they were there. It's our job to find them and bring them up to the stage. Okay. In bottom line, they have a very good ability to survive in the desert. They knew the area very well, and we have a lot to learn from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Uzi, and thank for the 4 speakers on this session. We have a respondent, Steve Rosen from Ben-Gurion University in the Negev, who again been working in the Negev on desert societies for the last 40 years, maybe even more. Steve, please. You're on mute. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Gidon. What I'd like to do now is just try to find some common themes to all these papers. And the first common theme is that all of these papers have noted specifically the diversity of Negev, sorry, I work in the Negev, of desert environments. The mythologies that the deserts are pure desert is a mythology. It's a stereotype and it's wrong. What we see here is the genius of desert peoples lies in their ability to find those microenvironments and exploit them in a way that they can effectively make a living. There are no lands which are purely desert. All these deserts have great potentials. The issue of microenvironments, and we can see this in Uzi's runoff from the eastern hills of the Uvda Valley. Calagero notes the riparian valleys and oases of the Atacama. And even today, in the middle of the Atacama, there are settlements based upon these oases. All of the speakers referred to long-term varying climatic regimes, okay? That is to say, climatic and environmental change over the long term. And these fluctuations operate at different time scales and at different geographic scales. At the largest scale, we have the transition from Pleistocene to Holocene, but also at the level of smaller level scales within the Holocene. We see constant adaptation, constant minor changes, constant shifts, and what we see are people not necessarily suffering collapse, but constantly adjusting to the different scales of change. Another theme which is very clear, and Arlene mentioned it, and I think everyone mentions it at one level or another, is that our record of global climatic change cannot be translated to local change. If we want to understand human adaptations, we have to understand the local environmental changes and the effects that the global changes have on the small scale geographies, because it's the small scale geographies at which people live. They don't live in glacial cores. And these global changes affect the smaller scales differently. Another fascinating aspect, which comes out especially in what Arlene said and what Yoav said, is the ameliorating effect of human beings on that local scale. So Arlene talked about, this is paradoxical in terms of what we all think about pastoralists. We all think that pastoralists engage in overgrazing and desertification. And yet in the Gobi, we see that on the small scales of local microenvironments, pastoralists, in fact, affect environmental amelioration. Exactly the opposite of what we would expect. Yoav notes an incredible paradox, and this is something I didn't know, where we get severe erosion, which then actually causes water retention in the substrate. So that, again, this aspect of human interaction at the smaller scale is crucial to our understandings of how people interact with and adapt to and adjust to desert environments. What we've seen in these papers is the entire range of human subsistence systems, from hunter-gatherers to pastoralists to agriculturalists, and in fact to full-scale intensive agriculture based on runoff irrigation. And what we should be looking at these things as adaptations to specific sets of social and environmental circumstances. What we see is shifting back and forth between different aspects of these subsistence systems. We should not see these things as collapse, and I'll talk about that, my perceptions on collapse, tomorrow in my paper. What we also see is changes in social systems as responses to potentials for exploitation, not necessarily as inevitable human social evolution. But again, we have an interaction between demography, between technology, between social interactions at different scales, and between varying and dynamic environments. This means that we're not dealing with linear evolution and linear systems. It also means we're not dealing with one-to-one relationships between environmental fluctuations and human demography and cultural change. That is, adaptations are not exclusively collapse or fluorescence, which seems to be a theme that we see constantly now, I'm sorry to say, especially among my colleagues in archaeology. A dry period equals collapse, and a wet period equals fluorescence. And what we've seen in these papers, in fact, I was really impressed by Calagaro's graphs showing that in the middle of a dry period, we have peaks and fluctuations in climate. But we see that in all of these papers and all of this work. So in fact, what we see are evidence of human resilience and adaptation in spite of changes in or fluctuating environments. And as Uzi pointed out, even in what is seen to be periods of desiccation as a result of the human ability to exploit the special resources of the desert, we may have population increase and what we see as fluorescence. Final word here. These are really fundamental flexibilities within desert adaptations. We view deserts as harsh and inherently problematic to live in. But what we see is that human societies in the desert, in fact, are incredibly flexible. The flexibility derives from the ability to adopt different technologies, the ability to shift between different levels of social organization, between geographic flexibility, territorial flexibility. In many ways, human adaptations to the desert are more resilient than what we see in the settled zone. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Steve, for these remarks. And now, before opening the stage to questions and comments, I would like to add another dimension that it's my observations from the 4 presentations, and concerns more or less in the line of what Steve started with the question of the long durée or the longevity of human presence in the desert. Because working in particularly in the Negev, but also in Sinai and other deserts of the Near East, there are always the questions of these periods of affluence and decline, or a total abandonment. And there is a famous argument in literature between Steve and Israel Finkelstein and Avi Pervolosky back in the 90s. Do we see the whole sequence of human presence in desert in the past? Are there periods in which the desert is completely open, or is this only our not sharp enough methodologies that mean that we cannot observe these people? They were there, but you can see them. Or on the contrary, there are periods in which the desert is empty, and resilience means resilience by movement. You can see it even in the early modern period, in the 19th, 20th century, by the movement of Bedouins from south to the north. When you have a problem, then you move to some better areas. And the question is whether these areas, and we have 3 wonderful examples, both in Mongolia and in Atacama and in the Negev. And the question that the presenter can relate to it, can we see periods in which these lands were completely open, or the resilience means continuous presence, no matter what are the environment conditions? Of course, there are periods of affluence, period of more favorable climatic conditions, and periods of less rains, desiccation, and so on. So in speaking about resilience, I think we have to look at both at the long durée, look at particular places within the big deserts, as Steve said, and as Uzi presented in the Uvda Valley, which is a kind of microcosmos. And can we relate similar trends between these 3 different deserts? So this is like an opening point to the questions. And since I'm not the director of this event, I will ask whether we will to people to ask and then let the presenter answers.
Shmuel Yerushalmi wants to ask something. You can
I do. Okay, I want to ask all presentators next question. I want to ask you about the impact on resilience and on life in generally of desert societies of meeting between traditional life to modern civilization.
Okay, we can take another 1 or 2 questions or comments before letting the speakers to respond.
No one asked. No one asked now.
Do we have another question, remark, comment?
Not yet.
Okay, so we can just open the stage for the presenter. We can do it maybe by the order of speaking. We start with Arlene, then Yoav and Kalugero and Uzi.
Okay, well, to answer your question very briefly, in Mongolia, there is a very deep and proud tradition of the impact of pastoralists on world history and their heritage. So the pastoral ideal is cherished in Mongolia, but in many places around the world, pastoralists have been squeezed out for agricultural interests and tourism interests and various other initiatives. And so it serves the political aims of modern states to, I wouldn't say demonize, but to highlight their perspective of pastoralists, of degrading landscapes to justify settling them or moving them out. So I think it's really important to get a deeper understanding of how they are capable of managing their environments over the long term. That's all I have to say.
Yoav?
Sorry to say, but I will have to hear again the question. I mean, summarize of the question will help me to give an answer. So anybody can summarize the question again, or maybe I will ask Shmuel Yerushalmi to repeat, summarize of his question, because
it was my understanding that he was asking about the impact on modern societies or the long, but I'm not sure if I understood.
I think that the key issue is trying to understand what is the natural conditions and what are the resources as much as they are depleted, because this is basically a desert and we cannot force the desert to be a kind of a wetland or whatever. I mean, this is the natural conditions. Now, beside that, we can say that taking into account the limited resources in our days, in the modern life, two things can be added in order to help some more people maybe to come and live in the deserts, because of you, as you know, population is going everywhere and people are pushing themselves because this reason or another one into desert areas. Now, the two very important things here, first of all, solar energy, and the other one is the ability to bring water from the local seas that are locally, like in the Atacama, very close to the desert region. And of course, desalination projects with solar energy, that the desert is very, very rich on that, maybe the best place on earth to make solar energy. These two things can increase our ability to plan a modern life in deserts, not in the same ways that the previous societies were doing, but in a new way, in new methods that can fit to our needs in the 21st century. Now, the third day of the conference is dedicated to that. The future ability, or our best understanding of what the future can give us in the terms of take some knowledge, important knowledge from the previous societies, go into the future planning of better lives in the deserts.
Thank you. I would like to add a question to Carol before he answers, and this relates to mobility and distances. In light of whatever you have shown us, is there the pattern of what were the distances in which people move in different periods between the high areas and the coastal plain, or and is it dependable on environment condition or seasons of the year? And can you trace a kind of pattern between the periods, how far people were moving from place to place in this annual cycle?
Gidon?
Is this a question for me or?
Yes, that was a question for you before you relate to the other question, which was relating to the connection between the desert society and the modern people. So I would like to add another question about ranges of mobility in different periods.
Yeah, it's a very good question. By the end of the Pleistocene, you have to imagine that the different landscape of the Atacama Desert from the Pacific coast to the highland was not broken as today. Today, most of this landscape are separated by very dry terrains or very dry landscape. By the end of the Pleistocene, there was a continuity, let's say, for greener areas. In other words, more vegetation on the coast, vegetation in the intermediate plain, Of course, the highlands were more vegetated, there was more water, more animals. So for people to move back and forth from the coast to the highland was not a problem, you know. So we think that at least the sources of the material that they brought from the coast, 80 kilometers to the west, and from the highland, another 80 kilometers roughly, you know, from the highland, it was done by people by themselves. We are talking, by the end of the Pleistocene, probably there were very few people in the whole continent, you know. So people need to move in order to get material and to get ideas. For instance, the shapes of the artifact that I showed, the projectile point, are very common in very huge areas, you know, in the Pacific coast, in Uruguay, in northwestern Argentina, and so on, so on. So people were not only interchanging or moving material, but also some ideas and technologies in how to manage this raw material. A completely different business, you know, happened 7,000 years later when people went back to the desert after this huge archaeological silence between 9,000 to about 3,000 years ago, because there was no water at all. So then they become farmers, and they use camelids to move merchandise or wood, whatever you call them, from the coast. For instance, guano, the seabird guano, which is very important for fertilizing this very salty soil, was brought by the camelids. They brought also fish, shellfish, because that landscape, that inland landscape, was not able to support, even though people was working hard in farming the land, but it was not enough to keep the people in the desert. They had to complement their diet, their everyday life, with food that was brought from the Pacific coast, fish and shellfish and other things. And also they brought stuff from the highlands. They moved the camelids, and they brought some potatoes and meat, particularly especially meat, charqui. So in that case, the interaction or the integration of the landscape was completely different. Yeah, one was based on foot, people moving by foot, and on the second phase, farmers, they were moving with the help of camelids. The camelids in South America, you cannot ride them. You can use them to move stuff, but they are not like the camelids in Northern Africa. You know, they are completely different, or horses. You know, so but people move. You know, so they created a special route to go from the coast to the highlands. We still can see those paths and those marks on the landscape. And of course, the Inca Empire, they transform and they improve all this network. Archaeologists are talking about 40 or 40,000 kilometers of road from Ecuador all the way to the central part of Chile, that integrated all these very old roads or paths that were used by people for 100 or several thousand years. And so that I don't think what was another. I don't know if I answered your question or not. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Uzi.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I would like to say a few words. First of all, let's go back to the ancients. These people had no other choice but to be smart if they wanted to survive in the desert. And they did it quite successfully, as I see them or their remains. This is not so true to us modern people, because if you see how we developed the Negev, for example, we did very successful things like the agriculture in the Araba Valley, but we made many mistakes. Now, if the world population growth, the desert expands, we have no choice but to settle in the desert. What I recommend to do is to do it very carefully, not with enthusiasm, as we did, but with very deep care, to learn very well the desert, to know it well, intimately, like the ancients, at least. We have better tools to learn, but we don't have the same spirit of learning, if I see it correctly. So what I recommend is to go into the desert very carefully. For example, if we look at the Negev, this is a very small area compared to the Atacama or the Mongolian steppe. So, and we need it very badly as an open space. So it means not to settle everywhere, but in small clusters of small communities, like kibbutzim, with here and there urban center, also not too large. In my view, for instance, Eilat does not have to grow much, and Mitzpe Ramon does not have to grow much, and also even Beersheba. But in the rest of the area, to build small settlements, small communities with connection between them in clusters, and to leave most of the area open. We need an open space much more than we actually know. The discipline of biophilia now show it very, very convincingly. How much do we need open spaces? So this is how I suggest to see the desert. Another word, the climate of the desert is actually good for living. I'll give one example. The dry air also means low amount of positive ions in the air, which has a very good positive influence on our body and soul, etc.
Thank you, Uzi. I think we have time for one more question that we have in the chat from Claudia Martins. And she asked, I think, a very crucial issue. If it's possible to identify patterns on time and condition when human societies become resilient. If it's a transition from a different climate condition, how long it does take to become resilient, and how can we measure such resilience. This is open for all four presenters.
Okay.
I see that Calogero is.
Yeah, I think we have been discussing about this between our colleagues and with people, you know, in this public lecture, you know. And so one of the things that impressed us that people in the Atacama, I think this is one of the most important resilience factors, is that they never become very complex in terms of social structure. They were organized in a very simple way. So society can get together, you know, 100 people, 1,000 of people for one season, for 1 month. But then all of them go back to their small communities. Small communities are better prepared to support changes in the environment or changes even within the group. And so I think that was the first point, you know, for that we have been stressing. Second is that they were very opportunistic. When we do field work in the highlands, in the Pampa Tamarugal Basin, people said, well, we used to go to where you are doing archaeology when every time that we saw that we're raining in the highlands, so we knew where the water will show up on the lowlands. So they move all their stuff, you know, by walking, because there was no way to get by car. We're talking about 30, 40 years ago. So they move with all the tools to farm the land. And they farmed the land for that season to produce some crops. And I think that pattern occurred many times in the past. And for that reason, we saw this sort of a huge area of archaeological remains, thinking that were hundreds of thousands of people working together simultaneously. But I think that these are remains of a small group of people that were taking advantage of this these pools of water getting into the desert. And complementarity. In the Atacama Desert, you cannot live just by based all your economy in one particular ecological system. You have to complement, and you have two possibilities. You control all the other landscapes or ecological system, or you exchange with other people. And in the Andes, people were doing both. They were controlling islands or colonies, outside of their mainland, or they were exchanging. There were a lot of negotiation. And today, if we look at what is going on with the Indian communities, or the indigenous communities in Chile, the Aymara, they don't fight against the state. We compare with the Mapuche. Well, the Mapuche story is completely different. It's harder, it's bloody, and so on and so on. But the Aymara, they always tend to negotiate. They always seek to talk. And I think also this is part of their way to manage society and to manage the landscape and the environment. Need to talk, need to negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I would like to say something. The desert, we have the same thing here. Desert is an empty land. So because it's an empty land, we can do whatever we want. So mining is very hard in the northern part of the country, because who cares? There is no money, so there is no water, no animals, no plants, nothing, just a good place to mine. But the desert, every place you go, there is some very specialized kind of life. And I think the way that we are treating our planet, we will need to look at that kind of life that are growing on the desert today. And so using wind energy and solar energy and using different sources of water. We are working now with ideas to get the fog water, which is a very untraditional way to use the possibilities in northern Chile that were used by prehistoric people. People along the coast, they found a way to concentrate, to get water from the fog to feed people along the coast, which is very dry. That's it. Thank you.
I have one comment to Calogero. I'm afraid that the Neolithic sites that you showed, the habitation sites, were stolen from the Negev.
Yeah, it's the same pattern. Yeah. The same
They
pattern.
are just the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I may add one last final comment, because I see that we are way beyond the time. The issue of resilience, there's another very heavy impact on it, and this will be discussing tomorrow, if I made a small promo for tomorrow's session, because there are some other powers working, usually within the fringe of the desert. The connection between desert societies and imperial powers make another dimension of this resilient struggle. Or maybe it's not such a struggle, but once